The grand shopping mall in the heart of Chicago was always busy on Saturday afternoons. People rushed from store to store, carrying bags filled with new clothes, electronics, and gifts. The sound of conversations mixed with the gentle music playing through the speakers. In the center of the mall, near the large fountain, stood a beautiful black grand piano. It was placed there for special performances, and today, a famous pianist named Michael Harrison was going to play for the crowd. Michael Harrison was not just any pianist. He had performed in concert halls across the world. He had played for presidents and kings. His fingers had touched the keys of pianos in Paris, London, Tokyo, and New York. At 45 years old, he had won countless awards and was considered one of the best classical pianists of his generation. But today, he was doing something different. He was performing at a mall as part of a charity event to raise money for children who could not afford music lessons. The security guards had set up velvet ropes around the piano to keep the crowd at a safe distance. Hundreds of people had already gathered, holding their phones ready to record the performance. Parents lifted their children onto their shoulders so they could see better. The mall management had placed comfortable chairs near the front for special guests and elderly visitors. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. Michael arrived wearing a simple black suit with a white shirt. He did not like too much attention before his performances. He preferred to stay calm and focused. He shook hands with the mall manager and smiled politely at the photographers who took his pictures. Then he walked toward the piano, running his fingers gently across the smooth surface. This piano was beautiful. It was one of the finest brands in the world. He sat down on the bench and adjusted it to the perfect height. In the crowd, standing near the back, was a small boy named. He was only 8 years old. His clothes were simple and worn. His shoes had small holes near the toes, and his jacket was too big for his thin body. He had messy brown hair that fell over his forehead, and his eyes were large and curious. He held tightly to the hand of his grandmother, who had brought him to the mall that day. Was 72 years old. She had raised since he was a baby because his parents had died in a car accident when he was only 2 years old. Life had not been easy for them. Worked as a cleaner in a small office building, earning just enough money to pay for their tiny apartment and food. There was never any extra money for toys or games or music lessons, but loved with all her heart, and she tried her best to give him a good life. Had always been fascinated by music. Even as a baby, he would stop crying whenever he heard a melody. As he grew older, he would sit for hours listening to music on the old radio in their apartment. He would close his eyes and move his fingers in the air, pretending to play an invisible instrument. Noticed this and felt sad that she could not afford to buy him a real instrument or pay for lessons. But she always encouraged him to dream. One day, when he was 6 years old, took him to a church near their home. The church had an old piano in the corner and the pastor allowed to touch it. From that moment, everything changed. Fell in love with the piano. He would beg to take him to the church every week just so he could sit at that old piano and press the keys. He taught himself to play by listening to music and trying to copy the sounds. He had no teacher. He had no books. He only had his ears and his determination. The pastor of the church, Father Thomas, noticed his talent. He was amazed at how quickly the boy learned. He gave permission to come to the church whenever he wanted to practice, and so, for 2 years, spent every free moment at that old church piano. He played early in the morning before school. He played in the afternoon after school. He played on weekends and holidays. He practiced until his fingers hurt, and then he practiced some more. Watched her grandson with pride and wonder. She did not understand how he could play so beautifully without any formal training. She believed it was a gift from God. She believed that was special. And deep in her heart, she hoped that someday, someone important would hear him play and give him the chance he deserved. Today had brought to the mall because she had heard about the charity event on the radio. She wanted to see a real professional pianist perform. She wanted him to be inspired. She wanted him to know that dreams could come true if you worked hard enough. She did not have money to buy him anything, but she could give him this experience. She could show him what was possible. stood on his toes trying to see over the heads of the adults in front of him. His heart was beating fast with excitement. He had never seen a grand piano this beautiful before. The church piano was old and some of its keys were broken, but this piano was perfect. It was shiny and magnificent, and the man sitting at it was about to play. Michael Harrison took a deep breath and placed his fingers on the keys. The crowd fell silent. Even the children stopped talking. The only sound was the gentle splashing of the fountain behind them. Michael began to play. The music that flowed from his fingers was breathtaking. It was Chopin, one of the most beautiful and difficult composers to play. The notes danced through the air like butterflies. They rose and fell, soft and loud, fast and slow. The music told a story of love and loss, of joy and sadness, of hope and despair. Could not move. He could not breathe. He had never heard anything so beautiful in his entire life. Tears formed in his eyes, and he did not even notice them rolling down his cheeks. His grandmother looked down at him and saw the expression on his face. It was pure wonder, pure love. She squeezed his hand gently, and he squeezed back without looking away from the piano. The performance lasted for 30 minutes. Michael played 5 different pieces, each one more beautiful than the last. When he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. People cheered and whistled and clapped their hands until they were red. Michael stood up and bowed gracefully. He smiled and waved at the crowd. The charity event had been a success. They had raised a lot of money for the children's music program. But the event was not over. Something was burning inside him. A feeling he could not explain, a desire so strong that it took control of his body. Before he knew what he was doing, he let go of his grandmother's hand and began pushing through the crowd toward the piano. Called out too, but her voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. She tried to follow him, but her old legs could not move fast enough through the mass of people. She watched helplessly as her grandson disappeared into the crowd, moving closer and closer to the piano. Her heart filled with fear. She was afraid that the security guards would be rough with him. She was afraid that he would be embarrassed in front of all these people. She pushed forward as fast as she could, saying "excuse me" to everyone she passed. Did not hear his grandmother calling. He did not hear anything except the echo of the beautiful music still playing in his head. His small body squeezed between adults, ducking under arms and weaving through legs. He did not think about what he was doing. He did not think about the consequences. He only knew that he had to get to that piano. He had to touch those keys. He had to make music. The security guards were busy talking to each other, celebrating the success of the event. They did not notice the small boy slip under the velvet rope. Michael Harrison was standing near the piano, talking to the mall manager and shaking hands with some wealthy donors who had contributed to the charity. Cameras were still flashing, and reporters were asking questions about his upcoming concert tour. Walked slowly toward the piano, his eyes fixed on the beautiful instrument. It was even more magnificent up close. The black surface was so shiny that he could see his own reflection in it. The keys were pure white and black, perfect and clean. He reached out his small hand and touched the side of the piano gently, as if he was touching something holy. One of the security guards finally noticed him. "Hey, kid," he shouted, "you cannot be in here. Get back behind the rope." He started walking toward with an annoyed expression on his face. The guard was a large man with broad shoulders and a stern face. He was used to dealing with troublemakers, and he assumed this boy was just another kid trying to cause problems. Michael Harrison heard the commotion and turned around. He saw the small boy standing next to his piano, wearing old clothes and worn shoes. He saw the security guard approaching with an angry expression. Something about the scene made him pause. There was something in the boy's eyes, a hunger, a longing, a love for the piano that Michael recognized because he had felt the same way when he was young. "Wait," Michael said, holding up his hand to stop the security guard. "Let me talk to him." The guard stopped, surprised by the pianist's request. "But sir," he began, "this boy should not be here. He could damage the piano or cause trouble." Michael shook his head gently. "Just give me a moment, please," he said. His voice was calm but firm. The guard nodded reluctantly and stepped back, keeping his eyes on the boy. Michael walked over too and knelt down so they were at the same eye level. "Hello there," he said with a kind smile. "What is your name?" Looked at the famous pianist with wide eyes. He could not believe that this man was actually talking to him. "My name is, sir," he said in a small voice. Michael nodded. "That is a nice name. Tell me, why did you come up here? Do you like the piano?" Nodded eagerly. "I love the piano, sir. I love it more than anything in the world. I have never seen one this beautiful before. The piano at my church is old and broken, but this one is perfect. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." His words came out in a rush, full of excitement and passion. Michael felt something stir in his heart. He saw himself in this boy. 50 years ago, he had been just like, poor, unknown, but filled with a burning love for music. He had grown up in a small town where nobody believed in him. His parents had been factory workers who could barely afford food, let alone piano lessons. But Michael had taught himself to play on an old keyboard he found in a garbage dump. He had practiced every day until his fingers bled. And eventually, someone had given him a chance. "Do you play the piano?" Michael asked. Nodded shyly. "Yes, sir. I taught myself at the church. I do not have a teacher. I just listen to music and try to copy it. I know I am not very good, but I love to play. I play every day. It makes me feel happy. It makes me feel like I am flying." The crowd had grown quiet, watching this unusual conversation between the famous pianist and the poor boy. Some people were recording on their phones, curious about what was happening. Had finally made it to the front of the crowd. She stood behind the velvet rope, her heart pounding with worry. She wanted to call out to apologize for his behavior, but something stopped her. She saw the kindness in Michael's eyes, and she decided to wait and see what would happen. Michael stood up and looked at the piano, then back at. The boy's eyes were so full of hope that it almost broke Michael's heart. He remembered all the times he had been rejected as a child. He remembered the people who had laughed at him and told him he would never amount to anything. He remembered the pain of wanting something so badly and being told he could not have it. Without thinking too much about it, Michael made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He turned to the crowd and spoke in a loud, clear voice. "Ladies, and before we end today's event, we have a special guest who would like to play for you. This is. He has taught himself to play the piano at his local church, and he has never had a professional lesson in his life. I would like to give him a chance to perform for you today." The crowd murmured in surprise. Some people looked skeptical, others looked curious. The mall manager looked worried and whispered something to Michael about liability and schedules, but Michael ignored him. He turned back to and smiled. "Would you like to play something for us?" he asked. His face turned pale. His hands began to shake. He had never played in front of so many people before. At church, there were only a few old ladies who listened to him, but here there were hundreds of people. Cameras were recording. Important people were watching. What if he made a mistake? What if he embarrassed himself? What if he embarrassed this kind man who was giving him a chance? But then remembered something his grandmother always told him. She always said that fear was just a feeling, and feelings could not stop you unless you let them. She always said that God had given him a gift, and it was his duty to share that gift with the world. She always said that no matter what happened, she would be proud of him for trying. Took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice trembling but determined. "I would like to play." Michael smiled warmly and gestured toward the piano bench. "Then please," he said, "take a seat. The piano is yours." Walked to the bench on shaky legs. He climbed up and sat down, adjusting his position just like he had seen Michael do earlier. The bench was soft and comfortable, nothing like the hard wooden stool at the church. He looked at the keys and took another deep breath. Then he placed his small fingers on the cool ivory surface. The crowd fell completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Everyone watched the small boy with the messy hair and the worn clothes. Nobody expected much. They thought he would play something simple, maybe a nursery rhyme or an easy beginner song. They thought Michael was just being kind to a poor child. They had no idea what was about to happen. They had no idea that their lives were about to be touched by something extraordinary. Closed his eyes and let his mind travel back to the church. He imagined he was sitting at the old piano with the broken keys and the faded wood. He imagined the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, creating colorful patterns on the floor. He imagined Father Thomas sitting in the front pew, smiling and nodding with encouragement. He imagined his grandmother standing at the back, her hands clasped together in prayer. He imagined he was home. And then he began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were soft and gentle, like raindrops falling on a quiet lake. But within seconds, the music grew stronger and more complex. Was playing's Moonlight Sonata, one of the most famous and difficult pieces ever written. His small fingers moved across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone his age. The melody flowed from the piano like water from a mountain spring, pure and clear and beautiful. The crowd gasped. People who had been looking at their phones suddenly stopped and stared. Parents who had been trying to control restless children fell silent and listened. Even the security guards who had been ready to remove the boy stood frozen in shock. This was not what anyone had expected. This was not a child playing a simple song. This was a miracle. Michael Harrison stood a few feet away from the piano, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. He had heard thousands of pianists in his life. He had taught hundreds of students. He had been a judge at international competitions where the best young musicians in the world performed. But he had never heard anything like this. This boy, this small child with no formal training, was playing with a skill and emotion that rivaled professional concert pianists. It was impossible. It was unbelievable. But it was happening right in front of his eyes. The Moonlight Sonata continued to fill the mall with its haunting beauty, played the slow, first movement with such feeling that several people in the crowd began to cry. His fingers pressed the keys with perfect pressure, creating dynamics that ranged from whisper-soft to thunderously powerful. He played without sheet music, without looking at the keys, with his eyes closed and his face lifted slightly toward the ceiling. He was not just playing the notes. He was feeling every single one of them. Stood at the velvet rope with tears streaming down her wrinkled face. She had heard play many times at the church, but she had never heard him play like this. The grand piano brought out a richness in his playing that the old church piano could never produce. The acoustics of the mall amplified the sound in a way that made it seem like the music was coming from heaven itself. She covered her mouth with her hand to stop herself from sobbing out loud. Her grandson was an angel. Her grandson was a gift from God. The first movement ended, and without pausing, transitioned into the second movement. This section was faster and more playful, requiring quick finger work and perfect timing. His hands danced across the keys like they had a life of their own. His left hand provided a steady bass rhythm while his right hand flew up and down the keyboard, hitting every note with flawless accuracy. Some people in the crowd actually laughed with joy because they could not believe what they were witnessing. Michael Harrison felt something he had not felt in many years. He felt inspired. He felt humbled. He felt like he was in the presence of true genius. Over the past decade, playing the piano had become routine for him. He performed because it was his job, because people expected him to, because it was how he earned his living. But somewhere along the way, he had lost the pure joy of making music. He had forgotten what it felt like to play because you loved it, not because you had to. This boy was reminding him. This boy was teaching him. The mall had become completely silent except for the music. Store employees had come out of their shops to listen. People on the upper floors had stopped walking and were leaning over the railings to see. Even the fountain seemed to have grown quieter, as if they too wanted to hear the boy play. It was one of those rare moments when time seems to stop and something magical happens. Everyone who was there knew they were witnessing something special. They knew they would remember this day for the rest of their lives. Moved into the third movement, the most difficult part of the sonata. This section was fast and intense, requiring incredible speed and endurance. Many professional pianists struggled with this movement, often making mistakes or losing their rhythm, but played it flawlessly. His small hands stretched to reach the wide intervals. His fingers struck the keys with power and precision. The music built and built, growing louder and more passionate with each passing measure. People in the crowd were recording on their phones, their arms held high above their heads to capture the performance. Some were texting their friends, telling them to come to the mall immediately. Others were posting on social media, sharing the video with the world. Within minutes, the footage would begin to spread across the internet. Within hours, it would be seen by millions. But at that moment, nobody was thinking about fame or viral videos. They were simply lost in the music. The final notes of the sonata rang out through the mall, powerful and triumphant, held the last chord for several seconds, letting it echo and fade naturally. Then he lifted his fingers from the keys and opened his eyes. For a moment, there was complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. And then the crowd exploded. The applause was deafening. People cheered and whistled and screamed with excitement. Some were crying. Some were laughing. Some were doing both at the same time. Strangers hugged each other, united by the incredible experience they had just shared. Parents lifted their children high so they could see the boy who had created such beautiful music. It was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos. Sat at the piano bench, looking around in confusion and wonder. He had never experienced anything like this. At the church, people would clap politely and say nice things, but this was different. This was overwhelming. He did not know what to do or where to look. His hands were shaking and his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his ears. Michael Harrison walked to the piano and stood next to. He placed his hand gently on the boy's shoulder and spoke into the microphone that had been set up for his own performance. "Ladies and," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "in my 40 years of playing and teaching music, I have never witnessed anything like what we just saw. This young man is not just talented. He is a prodigy. He is a once-in-a-generation genius, and I am honored to have met him today." The crowd cheered even louder. Cameras flashed from every direction. Reporters who had been covering the charity event suddenly realized they had a much bigger story on their hands. They pushed forward, shouting questions and trying to get closer to the piano. Who is this boy? Where did he come from? How did he learn to play like that? Finally pushed through the crowd and ducked under the velvet rope. Nobody tried to stop her. She ran to and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close to her chest. "My boy," she whispered through her tears, "my beautiful, talented boy. I am so proud of you. I am so proud of you." Hugged his grandmother back, burying his face in her shoulder. He was crying too, though he was not entirely sure why. Everything was happening so fast. Everything was so loud and bright and confusing. But in his grandmother's arms, he felt safe. He felt loved. He felt like everything was going to be okay. The next few hours were a blur of activity and confusion. Reporters surrounded and asking endless questions about the boy's background and training. Photographers took hundreds of pictures from every angle. The mall manager tried to maintain order, but it was impossible. The crowd had grown even larger as people heard about what had happened and rushed to see the boy genius for themselves. Michael Harrison stayed close to and acting as a shield against the overwhelming attention. He politely but firmly asked the reporters to give the family some space. He guided them to a quiet office in the back of the mall where they could sit down and catch their breath. He ordered water and sandwiches and made sure they were comfortable before he sat down across from them. "Mrs.," he said, looking at the elderly woman with respect and curiosity, "your grandson has an extraordinary gift. I have traveled the world and heard countless musicians, but is special. He plays with a level of emotion and technical skill that most professionals never achieve. May I ask how he learned to play like this?" Wiped her eyes with a tissue and took a deep breath. "He taught himself," she said simply. "We do not have money for lessons or instruments. When he was 6, we went to a church near our home and he touched the piano there. From that moment he was obsessed. He would go to the church every day and practice for hours. The pastor let him use the piano whenever he wanted. That is all. He has never had a single lesson in his life. Michael shook his head in amazement. That is incredible, he said. The piece he played today's Moonlight Sonata is one of the most difficult compositions in classical music. Professional students study for years before attempting it, and played it perfectly, more than perfectly. He played it with soul. Sat quietly next to his grandmother, eating a sandwich and drinking water. He was tired and confused by all the attention. He did not fully understand why everyone was so amazed. He just played the music the way he felt it. He did not know it was supposed to be difficult. He did not know he was supposed to need lessons. He just loved the piano, and the piano seemed to love him back. Michael leaned forward and spoke seriously. "Mrs., I would like to help. With proper training and opportunities, he could become one of the greatest pianists in the world. I have connections at the best music schools in the country. I have friends who are concert promoters and music producers. If you would allow me, I would like to become his mentor and guide his career." Looked at Michael with a mixture of hope and fear. She had dreamed of someone noticing his talent, but she had never imagined it would actually happen. She had never imagined that a famous pianist would want to help her grandson. But she was also afraid. She was afraid of the music industry and its demands. She was afraid of what success might do to her innocent grandson. She was afraid of losing him to a world she did not understand. "Mr. Harrison," she said carefully, "we are simple people. We do not have money or connections. Is my whole world, and I just want what is best for him. How can I be sure that helping him is the right thing to do? How can I be sure that this world will not hurt him?" Michael nodded with understanding. He appreciated her caution and her love for her grandson. "Those are fair questions," he said. "The music world can be challenging. There is competition and pressure and sometimes cruelty. But I promise you that I will protect. I will make sure he develops at his own pace. I will never force him to do anything he does not want to do. I see myself in him. I was also a poor boy with a gift and no opportunities. Someone helped me when I was young, and now I want to do the same for." Looked at her grandson, who was looking back at her with those big, curious eyes. She saw the hope in his face. She saw the love he had for music shining through every fiber of his being. She knew that keeping him from this opportunity would be wrong. She knew that God had brought them to this mall on this day for a reason. She took a deep breath and made a decision. "Okay," she said quietly, "we will accept your help, but I want to be involved in every decision. I want to make sure stays healthy and happy. His is more important than any career." Michael smiled warmly and reached out to shake her hand. "You have my word," he said. "Happiness and development will always come first. We will take this journey together, one step at a time." Outside the office, the news was spreading like wildfire. The videos that people had recorded on their phones were being shared on social media platforms around the world. News channels picked up the story and began broadcasting it on television. Headlines appeared on websites and newspapers. "Mystery boy stuns famous pianist at charity event." 8-year-old prodigy plays without training. "The homeless genius, boy from poverty amazes musical world." The stories were not entirely accurate, of course. Was not homeless, just poor. But the media loved a dramatic story, and this one had all the elements they wanted. A poor boy overcoming obstacles. A famous pianist recognizing hidden talent. A grandmother raising her grandchild with love and sacrifice. It was the kind of story that touched people's hearts and made them believe in miracles. By the evening, this video had been viewed over 10 million times. Comments poured in from around the world. People from Japan and Germany and Brazil and Australia wrote messages of support and amazement. Famous musicians and celebrities shared the video on their accounts. Record companies and talent agencies tried to contact the family with offers of contracts and deals. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. And returned to their small apartment that night, exhausted and overwhelmed. The apartment seemed even smaller than usual after the grandness of the mall. The furniture was old and worn. The The walls were thin and cracked, but it was home and was glad to be back. As prepared a simple dinner of soup and bread, sat by the window and looked out at the city lights. He thought about everything that had happened that day. He thought about the beautiful grand piano and the way it felt under his fingers. He thought about the famous pianist who had been so kind to him. He thought about all the people who had clapped and cheered and cried. "Grandma," he said quietly, "is my life going to change now?" Brought 2 bowls of soup to the small table and sat down next to her grandson. "Yes, my love," she said honestly. "Your life is going to change, but some things will never change. I will always love you. You will always be my grandson. And the piano will always be your gift. No matter what happens, those things will stay the same." Nodded and began to eat his soup. He was not sure what the future held, but he was not afraid. He had his grandmother. He had his music, and now, it seemed, he had a chance to share his gift with the world. That night dreamed of pianos. He dreamed of concert halls filled with thousands of people. He dreamed of standing ovations and beautiful music, and his grandmother sitting in the front row, smiling with pride. He did not know that many of those dreams would soon come true. He did not know that his life was about to become something beyond his wildest imagination. The weeks following that life-changing Saturday were filled with new experiences and adjustments. Michael Harrison was true to his word. He immediately began working to help develop his incredible natural talent, while making sure the boy remained happy and grounded. The first thing he did was arrange for a beautiful upright piano to be delivered to a small apartment. When the delivery men carried the piano up the narrow stairs and placed it against the wall, stood frozen in disbelief. He walked around the instrument slowly, touching its surface with trembling fingers. He had never imagined having his own piano at home. He had always had to walk to the church to practice. Now he could play whenever he wanted. Now the music could be with him all the time. Watched her grandson with tears in her eyes. She had worked her entire life and had never been able to give him something like this. And here was a stranger, a famous man who owed them nothing, giving them this precious gift. She tried to thank Michael, but he waved away her gratitude. "This is not a gift," he said. "This is an investment. The world needs to hear this boy play, and he needs a proper instrument to practice on." Michael began visiting the apartment 3 times a week to give formal lessons. At first, he was careful not to change too much about the way he played. The boy had developed his own unique style, a natural expression that was part of what made him so special. Michael did not want to destroy that by forcing him into traditional methods. Instead, he focused on refining his technique and teaching him music theory. Was a fast learner, even faster than Michael had expected. Within weeks, he was reading sheet music fluently, something most students took months or years to master. He understood complex musical concepts intuitively, as if he had known them all along and just needed someone to explain the words. Michael had taught hundreds of students in his career, but he had never encountered a mind like his. The boy seemed to absorb music the way a sponge absorbs water. But Michael was careful not to push too hard. He remembered his promise too. He remembered his own difficult childhood, when teachers had pushed him so hard that he sometimes wanted to quit. He made sure still had time to play outside, to watch television, to be a normal child. He insisted that school remained the priority. Music was important, but so was growing up healthy and happy. The media attention gradually died down as newer stories captured the public's attention, but the music world did not forget about. Behind the scenes, Michael was making arrangements and contacts. He spoke with directors of prestigious music schools. He talked with organizers of competitions and festivals. He met with agents and managers who could help shape his career. Everyone was eager to be involved with the young prodigy. 3 months after the mall performance, Michael made an important announcement. He had arranged to give a private concert at a famous music academy in New York City. The audience would consist of music professors, professional musicians, and talent scouts. This would be his first formal performance, a chance to prove that his talent was real and not just a lucky moment caught on video. was nervous about the idea. She had never been to New York. She had never been on an airplane. The farthest she had ever traveled was to the next state for a family funeral. The thought of taking her grandson to the big city was both exciting and terrifying. But she trusted Michael, and she knew this was an important opportunity for. The day before the trip, sat down and had a serious conversation with him. She wanted to make sure he understood what was happening and what was expected of him. She said, taking his hands in hers, "Tomorrow we are going to New York. You are going to play for very important people. Some of them might say nice things. Some of them might say critical things. No matter what happens, I want you to remember who you are. You are my grandson. You are a good boy who loves music. That is what matters, not what anyone else thinks." Nodded seriously. He understood what his grandmother was saying. He had already experienced some of the negative side of attention. Some children at school had become jealous of his fame. Some had made fun of him, calling him a show-off and a fake. It had hurt at first, but it helped him understand that jealousy was a normal human emotion and that he should not let it affect his own happiness. "I understand, Grandma," he said. "I will do my best and stay true to myself. I will not let the attention change who I am. I promise." Hugged him tightly. She was so proud of him, not just for his musical talent, but for his kind heart and humble spirit. She had worried that fame might spoil him, but so far, he remained the same sweet boy he had always been. She prayed that he would stay that way no matter what the future brought. The next morning, Michael picked them up in a car and drove them to the airport. For everything was new and exciting. He had never been to an airport before. He stared at the huge planes taking off and landing, his eyes wide with wonder. He held his grandmother's hand tightly as they walked through the security check and boarded the aircraft. The flight was only 2 hours, but it felt like an adventure to another world. He watched the clouds pass by outside the window and imagined he was flying through the music itself. He imagined the white clouds were musical notes floating in the sky. He imagined the blue above them was a vast symphony waiting to be played. When they landed in New York, was amazed by the size and energy of the city. Chicago was big, but New York was enormous. Buildings stretched up toward the sky like giant fingers. Cars and taxis honked their horns in an endless symphony of urban sounds. People walked fast, talked fast, and seemed to live their lives at a pace that made dizzy. Michael had arranged for them to stay at a nice hotel near the Music Academy. The room was fancier than anything had ever seen. It had a big bed with soft white sheets, a bathroom with a deep bathtub, and a window that looked out over the city lights. Felt out of place in such luxury, but Michael assured her that she deserved it. "You have raised an extraordinary boy," he said. "This is the least you deserve." That evening, they had dinner at a quiet restaurant where Michael explained what would happen the next day. The concert would be held in a small auditorium that seated about 200 people, would play 3 pieces of his choosing. Afterward, there would be a reception where people could meet him and ask questions. It would be formal but friendly. Listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions. He wanted to know what to wear, how to walk on stage, how to bow, what to do if he made a mistake. Michael answered each question patiently, impressed by the boy's professionalism. Most children his age would be nervous and distracted, was focused and determined. He treated this performance with the seriousness it deserved. That night lay in the big hotel bed and stared at the ceiling. He could hear the distant sounds of the city through the window. Somewhere out there, millions of people were living their lives, unaware that tomorrow, a small boy from Chicago would play the piano for some of the most important people in the music world. Was not nervous. He was ready. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, even if he did not know it. He closed his eyes and let music play in his mind. Chopin. The melodies danced in his thoughts, soothing and familiar. Tomorrow, he would share these melodies with the world. Tomorrow, he would take another step on a journey that had started in a small church with an old piano. He did not know where the journey would lead, but he knew he was ready to find out. The morning of the concert arrived with bright sunshine streaming through the hotel windows. woke up early and prepared clothes carefully. Michael had bought him a new black suit, a white shirt, and shiny black shoes for the occasion. When put on the suit and looked in the mirror, he hardly recognized himself. He looked like a real concert pianist, not a poor boy from the wrong side of Chicago. Fixed his hair and straightened his collar. She looked at him with so much love and pride that it seemed her heart might burst. "You are so handsome," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You look just like your father did at your age." Did not remember his parents, but he loved hearing stories about them. He knew they would be proud of him if they could see him now. Michael arrived at the hotel at noon to take them to the music academy. The building was old and grand, with tall stone columns and carved wooden doors. It had been training musicians for over 100 years, and some of the greatest artists in history had walked through its halls. Felt small and humble as he stepped inside. The staff at the academy treated them with great respect. They led to a beautiful room where a grand piano waited for him. It was even more impressive than the one at the mall. The keys were perfect. The sound was rich and deep. Sat down and played a few notes, feeling the instrument respond to his touch like a living creature. At 3 o'clock, the auditorium began to fill with people. Music professors in formal attire, professional musicians carrying violin cases and cello bows, critics with notebooks and pens, agents and managers in expensive suits. They had all come to see the boy genius they had heard about. They wanted to judge for themselves whether the stories were true. Backstage, waited quietly with his grandmother and Michael. He was not nervous. He felt calm and focused, like he always did before playing. His grandmother held his hand and whispered prayers under her breath. Michael gave him last-minute advice and encouragement. "Remember," Michael said, "you are not playing for them. You are playing for yourself. You are playing because you love music. Do not think about the audience. Do not think about what they want. Just feel the music and let it flow through you." Nodded, he understood. The music was not about impressing people. The music was about expressing something that words could not say. The music was about sharing a piece of his soul with the world. At exactly 3:30, the lights in the auditorium dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. A distinguished-looking man in a gray suit walked onto the stage and spoke into a microphone. "Ladies and," he said, "thank you for joining us today for this special event. We are honored to present a young artist who has captured the attention of the music world. At just 8 years old, he has demonstrated a level of talent that defies explanation. Please welcome to the stage." The audience applauded politely as walked out from the side of the stage. He looked so small on the big platform. His footsteps echoed in the silent hall. He walked to the piano, bowed to the audience as Michael had taught him, and sat down on the bench. He adjusted his position, took a deep breath, and placed his fingers on the keys. He had chosen to play 3 pieces. The first was Chopin's Ballade No. 1, a romantic and technically demanding work. The second was Prelude in C major, a classical piece that showed off precision and discipline. The third was Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, a dramatic and virtuosic showpiece. Together, these 3 pieces would demonstrate range, skill, and emotional depth. He began with the Chopin. The first notes floated through the auditorium like leaves carried by a gentle wind. The audience leaned forward in their seats, already captivated. As the piece progressed, his playing grew more passionate and powerful. He navigated the difficult passages with ease, his fingers flying across the keys in a blur of motion. The romantic melodies spoke of love and longing, of dreams and disappointments. Some people in the audience felt tears forming in their eyes. When the Chopin ended, there was a moment of stunned silence before the applause erupted. The critics looked at each other in amazement. The professors whispered to their colleagues, "This was no accident. This was no fluke. This boy was the real thing." Paused for a moment, then began the mood shifted immediately. Where the Chopin had been emotional and flowing, there was precise and mathematical. Every note was placed perfectly. Every rhythm was exactly right. It was like watching a master architect construct a perfect building, brick by brick. The audience was mesmerized by the control and discipline on display. When they ended, the applause was even louder. People were no longer politely clapping. They were enthusiastically celebrating. Some stood up from their seats. Some called out bravo and encore. The formality of the event was breaking down as raw emotion took over. Finally began This was the showpiece, the fireworks display. The Hungarian Rhapsody started slowly and mysteriously but quickly built into a whirlwind of speed and power. Hands moved so fast they became blurs. The music was wild and exciting, full of unexpected twists and turns. It was like a thunderstorm captured in sound. The piece reached its climax with a series of crashing chords and lightning-fast runs. Attacked the piano with controlled ferocity, drawing every ounce of power from the instrument. The audience held their breath, unable to believe what they were witnessing. This was not just playing. This was magic. The final chord rang out and faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the entire auditorium exploded. Every single person rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous. People cheered and shouted and clapped until their hands hurt. Some were openly weeping. Others were laughing with joy. It was a standing ovation like nothing the Academy had ever seen. Stood up from the piano bench and bowed. He looked out at the crowd and saw faces filled with wonder and admiration. He looked to the side of the stage and saw his grandmother, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped together in prayer. He looked at Michael, who was applauding and nodding with a huge smile on his face. At that moment, understood that his life had truly changed. He was no longer just a poor boy from Chicago who liked to play piano. He was an artist. He was a musician. He was someone who could touch people's hearts and souls with the power of his gift. It was a big responsibility, but he was ready for it. The reception afterward was overwhelming. Person after person came to shake his hand and congratulate him. Famous musicians told him they were honored to meet him. Critics declared him a genius. Agents offered contracts worth millions of dollars. Music school directors offered full scholarships. Everyone wanted a piece of the boy wonder. Stayed close to, protecting him from the crush of attention. Michael fielded questions and deflected inappropriate requests. Together, they navigated the chaos with grace and dignity. By the end of the evening, they had received dozens of offers and opportunities. His future was suddenly wide open with possibilities. That night back at the hotel, the three of them sat together in comfortable silence. They were exhausted but happy. They knew that something wonderful had begun. They did not know exactly where it would lead, but they knew they would face it together, as a family. The years that followed were filled with incredible success and wonderful opportunities. Michael carefully managed his career, making sure the boy did not perform too often or take on too much pressure. He insisted that continue his regular schooling, balancing his musical development with normal childhood experiences. He arranged for private tutors when had to travel for performances. He made sure there was always time for play, for friends, for simply being a kid. By the time turned 12, he had performed in concert halls across Europe, Asia, and North America. He had played for presidents and prime ministers, for kings and queens. He had won prestigious international piano competitions, often competing against musicians twice his age. His name had become synonymous with genius and wonder. But through it all, he remained the same humble, kind-hearted boy he had always been. Traveled with her grandson to every performance. She refused to let him go anywhere without her. She sat in the front row of every concert, her eyes filled with pride and love. She helped him stay grounded when the world tried to inflate his ego. She reminded him of their humble beginnings when success threatened to make him forget. She was his anchor, his constant, his home. The family's financial situation had changed dramatically. The performances and recording contracts had made them wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. They had moved from their tiny apartment to a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood. No longer had to work as a cleaner. She could focus entirely on caring for her grandson. It was a blessing that she never took for granted. But success came with challenges. Some people in the music world were jealous of his rapid rise. Critics who had once praised him began to look for flaws in his performances. Competing pianists resented the attention he received. There were whispers and rumors, accusations that his early performances had been staged or somehow fake. Tried not to let these negative voices affect him, but sometimes they hurt. The pressure of constant performance also took its toll. There were nights when he was so exhausted that he could barely keep his eyes open. There were times when his fingers ached so badly from practice that he could not hold a fork. There were moments when he wished he could be a normal boy, free from the expectations and demands of his extraordinary gift. Michael noticed the signs of burnout and took action. He canceled several upcoming performances and insisted that take a break. For 3 months, there were no concerts, no interviews, no public appearances. Spent the time at home, resting and recovering. He still played the piano every day, but only for himself, only for the joy of it. It was exactly what he needed. During this period, something important happened. Began to compose his own music. He had always played the compositions of famous masters, interpreting their works with his unique style. But now, melodies began to flow from his own imagination. He would sit at the piano and let his fingers find their own path, discovering music that had never existed before. His first composition was a simple piece that he wrote for his grandmother. He called it Lullaby. It was gentle and sweet, full of love and gratitude. When he played it for her, she cried for an hour straight. She said it was the most beautiful gift anyone had ever given her. She said it was worth more than all the money and fame in the world. Michael was thrilled to discover his composing ability. This added another dimension to his talent. Many pianists could play beautifully, but few could also create original works. Michael encouraged to develop this skill further. He introduced him to music composition teachers who could help him learn the technical aspects of writing music. When turned 14, he debuted his first full composition at a special concert in Vienna, the historic capital of classical music. The piece was called Journey, and it was inspired by his own life story. It began with a simple, sad melody that represented his early years of poverty and loss. It gradually built in complexity and beauty, representing his discovery of the piano and his rise to fame. It ended with a triumphant celebration that looked forward to the future with hope and joy. The premiere of Journey was a sensation. The audience gave a 20-minute standing ovation. Critics called it a masterpiece of emotional storytelling. Recording companies immediately wanted to release it. The composition was performed by orchestras around the world and became one of the most popular new classical works of the decade. But even as his career soared to new heights, never forgot his roots. He established a foundation to provide music education to underprivileged children. He donated pianos to schools and churches in poor neighborhoods. He gave free concerts for communities that could not afford expensive ticket prices. He visited hospitals and nursing homes, playing for people who could not come to him. One of his most meaningful projects was rebuilding the music program at Father Thomas's church, where he had first learned to play. He bought a brand new grand piano for the church and funded a full-time music teacher. He established scholarships for talented children from the neighborhood. He wanted to make sure that other kids like him would have the opportunities he had been given. Father Thomas was overwhelmed with gratitude. He had watched grow from a curious 6-year-old pressing the keys of the old church piano to a world-famous artist. He had prayed for the boy every day, asking God to bless his gift and protect his heart. Seeing give back to the community that had nurtured him was a dream come true. "My son," Father Thomas said during the ceremony to dedicate the new piano, "you have shown the world what is possible when talent meets determination and grace. You have shown that greatness can come from anywhere. You have shown that success does not have to change who you are. I am proud of you, not just for what you have achieved, but for the person you have become." Listen to these words with a full heart. He thought about all the people who had helped him along the way. his grandmother who had sacrificed everything to raise him, Michael, who had seen his potential and given him a chance, Father Thomas, who had opened the door to the church and let him play, all the teachers, supporters, and fans who had believed in him. He was not successful alone. He was successful because of love. That evening, after the ceremony, played a private concert in the church for only his grandmother, Father Thomas, and Michael. He played all the pieces that had defined his journey, the Moonlight Sonata that had started everything, the Chopin and from his first formal concert, and finally, Lullaby and Journey, the compositions that expressed his heart. As the music filled the small church, felt a peace that he rarely experienced on the grand stages of the world. This was where it had all begun. This was where he had discovered his love for the piano. This was his true home, no matter how far his career took him. Sat in the same pew where she had sat years ago, watching her young grandson discover his gift. Tears flowed down her cheeks as she listened to him play. She was no longer a young woman. Her hair was completely gray now, and her hands were wrinkled with age. But her love for was as strong as ever. He was her greatest joy, her proudest achievement, her reason for living. When the concert ended, walked to his grandmother and knelt beside her. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything." Cupped his face in her wrinkled hands. "You never have to thank me," she said. "You are my heart. Everything I have ever done was for you, and everything you have achieved brings me more happiness than you can know." The years continued to pass and grew from a talented teenager into a remarkable young man. At 18, he enrolled in a prestigious music conservatory, not because he needed the training, but because he wanted to learn more about music theory and history. He wanted to understand the deeper meanings behind the compositions he played. He wanted to become not just a performer, but a complete musician. His years at the conservatory were some of the happiest of his life. For the first time, he was surrounded by people his own age who shared his passion for music. He made friends who understood the joys and struggles of being a serious musician. He collaborated with other students on projects and performances. He fell in love with a talented violinist named Sarah, who shared his humble background and his dedication to giving back to others. Michael Harrison remains mentor and friend, though he was now an old man with white hair and tired eyes. He had retired from performing and spent his days teaching and advising young musicians. Visited him often, seeking guidance on difficult decisions and sharing stories of his adventures. Their relationship had evolved from mentor and student to something more like father and son. One winter morning, Michael called with sad news. His health was failing. The doctors had found something wrong with his heart, and they did not expect him to live much longer. Immediately canceled all his upcoming engagements and flew to Michael's side. For 2 weeks, stayed with Michael, keeping him company and caring for him. They talked about music and life and the journey they had shared. Michael shared stories from his own career that he had never told anyone before. He spoke of his regrets and his triumphs, his loves and his losses. He was at peace with his approaching death because he knew his legacy would live on through. "Promise me," Michael said one evening, holding his hand with weak fingers, "promise me you will never stop playing. Promise me you will use your gift to bring joy to the world. Promise me you will teach others as I taught you. The music must continue. The music must never die." "I promise," said, tears falling from his eyes. "I promise I will honor everything you have taught me. I promise I will carry your legacy forward. You saved my life, Michael. You gave me a future. I will never forget that." Michael smiled peacefully and closed his eyes. He passed away that night with by his side. The music world mourned the loss of a great artist and teacher, delivered the eulogy at Michael's funeral, speaking of his kindness, his wisdom, and his unwavering belief in the power of music to transform lives. The months after Michael's death were difficult for. He grieved deeply for the man who had been like a father to him. He questioned everything about his career and his purpose. For a time, he could not bring himself to play the piano at all. The instrument that had brought him so much joy now reminded him of his loss. But slowly, with the support of his grandmother and Sarah, began to heal. He remembered Michael's final request. He remembered his promise. The music must continue. And so, step by step, note by note, he returned to the piano. When he finally performed again, it was at a benefit concert for Michael's foundation, which supported music education for disadvantaged children. The concert was held in the same auditorium where had given his first formal performance years ago, the same music academy in New York, the same grand piano that had launched his career. The auditorium was filled with Michael's students, colleagues, and friends. They had come to honor his memory and to hear play, sat in the front row as she always did, older now but still strong. Sarah sat beside her, holding her hand. They watched as walked onto the stage, sat down at the piano and spoke into the microphone. "This concert is dedicated to Michael Harrison," he said, his voice steady but emotional. He believed that music could change the world. He believed that every child, no matter how poor or forgotten, deserved a chance to discover their gift. He gave me that chance, and now I will spend the rest of my life giving that chance to others. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. The first piece was Moonlight Sonata, the same piece he had played in that shopping mall when he was 8 years old. The music filled the auditorium, as beautiful and moving as ever. People closed their eyes and let the melody wash over them. They remembered Michael. They celebrated. They felt the power of music connecting them all. When the piece ended, the applause was long and heartfelt, but was not finished. He had prepared something special for this night. He began to play a new composition, one he had written in the weeks after Michael's death. He called it The Teacher. The composition told the story of a young boy who had no teacher and an old man who had so much to give. It told of their meeting, their journey, their love for each other. It moved through sadness and joy, through struggle and triumph, through loss and hope. It was the most personal and powerful piece had ever written. When the final note faded, there was complete silence. Then, slowly, people began to stand. One by one, then row by row, the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, but many people were crying too hard to clap. They had felt the story. They had understood. They had been touched by the music in a way that words could never achieve. After the concert, stood in the reception hall, accepting condolences and congratulations. Person after person came to shake his hand and share memories of Michael. Former students told stories of how Michael had changed their lives. Colleagues spoke of his generosity and kindness. Everyone agreed that Michael's greatest legacy was standing right in front of them, a humble young man with an extraordinary gift. That night, returned to his hotel room and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. He thought about his journey from that small apartment in Chicago to concert halls around the world. He thought about all the people who had helped him along the way. He thought about Michael, who had seen a poor boy at a shopping mall and decided to change his life. "I will keep my promise," whispered into the night. "I will play, I will teach. I will share the gift you gave me. The music will continue. The music will never die." In the distance, a church bell began to ring, its tones mixing with the sounds of the city. Closed his eyes and listened, hearing music in everything around him. The bell was not just a bell. The traffic was not just traffic. The voices of people on the street were not just voices. Everything was music. Everything was connected. Everything was beautiful. This was Michael's final lesson. This was the truth that would carry with him forever. Music was not just about playing notes on a piano. Music was about hearing the beauty in everything and sharing that beauty with the world. That was what Michael had done for, and that was what would do for others for the rest of his life. 20 years had passed since that fateful Saturday at the shopping mall. Was now 38 years old, a man in the prime of his life and career. He had achieved everything a musician could dream of. He had performed with the greatest orchestras in the world. He had won every major award in classical music. His compositions were played by students and professionals everywhere. His recordings had sold millions of copies. His name was spoken with the same respect as the legendary masters of the past. But what made proudest was not his personal success. It was the foundation he had built to help other children discover their musical gifts. The Michael Harrison Foundation, named in honor of his beloved mentor, now operated in 30 countries. It had provided instruments, lessons, and scholarships to over 100,000 children. It had changed countless lives, just as Michael had changed his life so many years ago. Was 92 years old now. Her body was frail and her mind sometimes wandered, but her love for her grandson remained as strong as ever. She lived in a comfortable nursing home near his house, where he visited her every day when he was not traveling. She no longer attended his concerts, but he always played for her privately, sitting at the piano beside her bed and filling her room with the music she loved. Sarah had become wife and partner in everything. They had been married for 15 years and had 3 children together. Their oldest daughter, named after her great-grandmother, had inherited her father's love for the piano. Their twin sons preferred the violin and cello, creating endless jokes in the family about forming their own chamber music group. One autumn afternoon received an invitation that stirred deep emotions in his heart. A shopping mall in Chicago was celebrating its 30th anniversary, and they wanted to perform at a special charity event. It was the same mall where everything had begun, the same fountain, the same space where a young boy had asked a famous pianist if he could play for a moment. Accepted the invitation immediately. He knew he had to be there. He knew this was a chance to complete the circle that had started 3 decades ago. He called his family and told them about the event. Everyone wanted to come. His wife, his children, his closest friends. Even, despite her age and weakness, insisted on attending. She wanted to see her grandson return to where it all began. The day of the event arrived with beautiful fall weather. The mall had been decorated with banners and flowers. A beautiful grand piano stood in the center, near the fountain that still splashed cheerfully. Hundreds of people had gathered, many of them families with young children who dreamed of becoming musicians themselves. Arrived with his family and was greeted by the mall manager, who was much younger than the manager from 30 years ago. The event was organized to raise money for music education, just like the original event that had introduced to the world. History was repeating itself in the most beautiful way. Before the performance began, stood at the podium and addressed the crowd. He told them the story of that Saturday afternoon so long ago. He told them about his grandmother who had raised him with nothing but love. He told them about Michael Harrison who had given him a chance. He told them about the power of belief and kindness, and the magic that happens when someone decides to help another person succeed. The audience listened with rapt attention. Parents held their children close. Young musicians looked up with the same wonder he had once felt looking at Michael. The story touched everyone who heard it because it was not just a story. It was a story about hope and possibility, about dreams coming true against all odds. When finished speaking, he walked to the piano and sat down. The crowd fell silent. Even the fountain seemed to grow quieter. Placed his fingers on the keys and began to play the Moonlight Sonata, the same piece that had shocked the world when he was 8 years old. The music flowed through the mall, more beautiful and profound than ever. His playing had matured over the years. It had deepened and grown richer. He played with the wisdom of age and the passion of youth. He played with the memory of everyone who had helped him along the way. He played for his grandmother sitting in a wheelchair nearby. He played for Michael, who was no longer alive but whose spirit lived on in every note. When the piece ended, the crowd erupted in thunderous applause. People stood and cheered. Children bounced with excitement. Parents wiped tears from their eyes. It was a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. But then something unexpected happened. A small girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, ducked under the velvet rope and walked toward the piano. She had messy brown hair and worn clothes. Her shoes were scuffed and her jacket was too big. She looked just like had looked 30 years ago. "Excuse me, mister," she said in a small, shy voice. "Can I play for a moment?" The crowd gasped. Security guards began to move forward, but held up his hand to stop them just as Michael had done for him so many years ago. He looked at the little girl with tears forming in his eyes. He saw himself in her. He saw the same hunger, the same longing, the same love for music. "What is your name?" he asked gently, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "My name is Lily," she said. "I do not have a piano at home, but I practice on the keyboard at school. I want to be a pianist like you someday." Smiled and stood up. He gestured toward the piano bench. "Then please," he said, "take a seat. The piano is yours." Lily climbed onto the bench and placed her small fingers on the keys. She was nervous and shaking, but she was determined. She began to play a simple melody, nothing compared to the sophisticated pieces had performed. But she played with such heart and passion that the crowd fell silent once again. Watched from her wheelchair, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. She was watching history repeat itself. She was watching another child discover their gift. She was watching the circle complete itself in the most beautiful way possible. When Lily finished her piece, the crowd applauded warmly, clapped the loudest of all. He walked to the little girl and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "That was beautiful," he said. "You have a real gift. Would you like to learn to play better?" Lily nodded eagerly, her eyes shining with hope. "More than anything in the world," she said. Turned to his assistant, who was watching from nearby. "Please take down this young lady's information," he said. "The Michael Harrison Foundation is going to make sure she gets everything she needs. Piano lessons, an instrument, whatever it takes. She will have every opportunity to develop her gift." Lily's eyes widened in disbelief. Her mother, who had been standing nervously at the edge of the crowd, burst into tears of joy. "Thank you," she cried, running forward to embrace her daughter. "Thank you so much." Smiled and nodded. He did not need to be thanked. Helping this child was not a favor, it was a duty. It was a continuation of the love that had been passed down to him. Michael had helped, now would help Lily. And someday Lily would help another child. The music would continue. The love would spread. The legacy would live on. That evening, after the event ended and the crowds dispersed, sat alone at the piano in the empty mall. His family had gone back to the hotel. The staff was cleaning up, but wanted one more moment in this sacred space. He played softly, letting his fingers wander across the keys without any specific piece in mind. He played fragments of all the music that had shaped his life. Chopin, his own compositions, the melodies blended together in a beautiful improvisation that told the story of his entire journey. As he played, he felt the presence of everyone who had made this moment possible. His parents, who had given him life before leaving too soon. His grandmother, who had given him love and stability. Father Thomas, who had given him access to the church piano. Michael, who had given him a chance and a future. Sarah, who had given him partnership and family. All the students he had taught, all the children his foundation had helped, all the lives that had been touched by music because of his journey. The music faded into silence and sat still for a long moment. Then he stood up, closed the piano lid gently, and walked toward the exit. Behind him, the fountain continued to splash in the empty mall. The sound of the water mixed with the echo of the music that still seemed to hang in the air. Stepped out into the cool evening air and looked up at the stars. "Thank you," he whispered to no one and everyone. "Thank you for the music. Thank you for the journey. Thank you for the love." And somewhere in the infinite space between the stars, he knew that Michael was listening. He knew that his parents were watching. He knew that the music would never end because music was not just sound. Music was love, and love was eternal. The story of the little boy who had asked to play for a moment had become a legend that would be told for generations. It was a story about the power of kindness and the magic of second chances. It was a story about never giving up on your dreams and always believing in yourself. It was a story about how one small moment can change everything. And it was a true story. Because in this world of uncertainty and struggle, true miracles do happen. All it takes is someone willing to say yes to a child with hope in their eyes and music in their heart.